All right, guys. This is a lecture to kind of walk you guys through 4 poems that I've chosen. Again, the choices were endless, but I feel like these 4 kind of exhibit the ideas of imagery really profoundly. So the first is William Carlos Williams' The Red Wheelbarrow. It's a very, very famous poem because of its simplicity. It's 8 lines, and it's free verse. And as you can see, the structure is very simple. It's a couple of words and then a single word, a couple of words, a single word. And you see the emphasis being placed on the words upon, barrow, water, and chicken. So those are kind of the main words that you're supposed to be paying attention to. So the poem is very simple. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. So we have this idea of this frozen moment of time, and we see this picturesque scene where we have a red wheelbarrow with a stark contrast of the white chickens next to it, and then we have it glazed with rainwater. So note the language that William Carlos Williams uses here. We've got descriptive imagery in terms of the color. So the juxtaposition of the red and white is very strong. We get this idea that there's almost an insurmountable amount of importance placed on this wheelbarrow. And the idea, of course, with chickens and a wheelbarrow is that we're looking at some type of farm, and you see that the red wheelbarrow, as sort of isolated as it is integral to the life of the farm. You see that it's, according to the speaker, it's integral, and everything depends on the functionality of that wheelbarrow to farm, to till, to keep moving grain, to move feed to the animals. So you get this sense of isolation and kind of calm and peace in this poetry. It's also purposefully vague because it's almost more than the author can put into words. So you get the feeling that he can't quite say what the importance of this is because it is so incredibly vital to the functionality of the farm. There's a lot of different interpretations of this poetry. It's very obscure and abstract on purpose. So I do encourage you to go ahead and look online and see what other interpretations you can find of the red wheelbarrow. The possibilities really are kind of endless here. Next, we're going to do a little more traditional. We're going to look at My Mistress Eyes Are Nothing Like the Sun, which is a sonnet 130 by William Shakespeare. And this is a very famous sonnet. Being a sonnet, it has 3 quatrains and a rhyming couplet at the end. You'll see the rhyme scheme is very simple. It's A, B, A, B. And it really does a fantastic job of painting this image. And we're bringing in some of these sort of figures of speech as well. So the idea is that he's speaking to, again, sort of an unnamed listener. He says, "My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If snow be white, why then her breasts are dun. If hair be wires, black wires grow on her head." So this iambic pentameter that he's using, of course, is very Shakespearean. And you'll notice that he's using ironic statements to kind of turn the trope of love poetry on its head. So the tone that we get is very unexpected, because you get a love poem and it's supposed to be something like Lord Byron's "My love is but a red, red rose," a very, very common trope, a very common symbol. And he's taking these symbols where lovers say things like, her lips are ruby red and her eyes glitter like the sun, shine like the sun. And he's saying, no, she's nothing like that. He's saying she doesn't have eyes that glow like the sun. Coral is more red than her lips are. If snow is white, well, then her breasts are this dingy color. And if hair be wires, black wires grow on her head. So the language is extremely almost grotesque in a way. And he says, I know what beauty is. I've seen roses damasked red and white. I don't see those roses in her cheeks. And he says, in some perfumes is there more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks. So the language that he's using, the imagery that he's using here is to give you a full sensory experience. So he's giving you smell. He's saying that the breath is reeks. He says, I love to hear her speak, yet well I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. So you can imagine in your head this sort of beautiful violin and piano sound that often gets attributed to the lover. Here he's saying her voice is not like that at all. It's not good. It's not pretty. It's not pleasing. And so he's saying, I don't see these rosy cheeks. I don't see white, soft skin. I don't see red lips. And he's saying, I grant I never saw a goddess go. My mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground. So she's saying she's not a goddess floating in the air. She's just a person walking on the ground. So after all of these sort of almost insults, and which are kind of satirical, he flips it. There's a turn. When you have, in poetry, you see that the rhyming couplet is set apart here, physically set apart. We have a turn, which signals a change in tone. And it says, and yet. That and is the signal that something is changing. So the tone is flipping on itself. And it says, and yet, by heaven, I think my love as rare as any she belied with false compare. So he's saying, and yet, even though I've just said all these horrible things about her, I think my love is just as important and rare and unique and significant and true as any she can compare it to, basically. So the tone here is quite humorous. He's making fun of the tropes of love poetry and saying, even though I just insulted her, I still love her. And you get the sense that he as a lover doesn't know exactly what he's doing. So that's why those metaphors and those images that he's using are really unique and uniquely used. If we look at Why They Went, this is a poem that is by a modern poet named Elizabeth Bradfield, who is an adventurer and sort of an eco-warrior. And she writes about essentially why people go to, as she says, that men might learn that what the world is like at the spot where the sun does not decline in the heavens. So in the Arctic, where it's bright and all day, she's giving us an understanding of what this experience is like for them. So she says, frostbitten, snowblind, hungry, craving, fresh pie and hot toddies, a whole roasted, unflippered thing to carve. So this image that we get, again, is rich with sensory imagery. And she's giving us this experience of these adventures. They're frostbitten, they're snowblind, they're hungry. So immediately we all identify hunger. We know what that feels like. A lot of us know what cold feels like, or what it feels like to have your toes so cold that they're frostbitten or snowblind. And she says they're craving fresh pie and hot toddies and a whole roasted unflippered thing to carve. So she's almost making the mouth water with these sort of descriptions of all these good tasting things. Craving a bed that had an hour before entering been warmed with a stone from the hearth. So craving this comforting, warm, inviting thing. So we have this juxtaposition of this imagery where we have frostbitten and warm stones. And again, this free verse language is kind of creating these sort of delusions or illusions in the mind, essentially. And she says, always back to Eden, to the time when we knew with certainty that something watched and loved us. So back to a time of innocence and a time of faith, essentially, when we're young, when we're free. It says that the very air was miraculous and ours, that all we had to do was show up. So she's bringing this back around. So she's saying, though they are physically frostbitten, snowblind, and hungry and craving fresh pie and hot toddies, mentally they're returning to a time of absolute freedom and trust and faith in sort of the grandeur of the divine and the grandeur of nature, and the divine that is founded in nature. He says, all we have to do, the air itself is miraculous. And so she's imbuing the air with this sense, this sort of intangible quality. She's saying it's ours for the taking. We just have to go and get it. And the last one I wanted to give you guys was Stopping by a Woods on a Snowy Evening by Robert Frost. This poem has 4 quatrains, and you'll see that It is iambic pentameter, and it's written in a pretty simple rhyme scheme, A, A, B, A, C, C, D, C, so on and so forth. So this was one that I kind of referenced in your lecture, where I said that it creates this atmosphere, essentially. And you get the speaker who's speaking either to himself or sort of an unnamed entity, and he basically stops in these woods, these quiet woods, and he says, "I think I know the person whose woods these are," and he says, "The house is in the village, though." So Frost was writing at a time when Romanticism was really pushing against the idea of industrialization. And so part of that was escaping to nature as a refuge, and escaping to nature as to escape sort of the modern day workaday world. So here the speaker has removed himself physically from the working world. And there's a figure who owns these woods, yes, but he's not in them. And the speaker is the one who's out in the woods, being one with nature. So he's physically removed himself from this sort of other developed industrial idea. And he says, "He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. So my little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near." So we get sort of this appreciation of the natural elements, and almost a personification of the horse, where he's giving it thoughts and emotions and feelings. Between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. So you'll notice there's a lot of round sounds in this evening of the year. It's very soft. It's not harsh language. There's not a lot of harsh consonants. That's helping to create this sort of sense of calm and quiet. And he says, "He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds that sweep of easy wind and downy flake." So the sounds that we are getting are silent almost. They're silent sounds, which is an oxymoron. We see the wind and the snowflakes are the only sounds. And we see the pictures that we're getting are sort of these soft images. The horse gives his head a shake. We hear the tinkling of the harness bells. All of these sounds are creating this very pleasant, inviting, welcoming imagery for us. He said, "The woods are lovely, dark, and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep." And this refrain right here of these two lines are sort of the weariness of the world kind of setting back in on this traveler. And you see that he kind of brings himself back out of sort of the magic and the mystic of the woods. And even though they're lovely and dark and deep, and these are good qualities. Not normally, we wouldn't use these qualities to describe that, but these are good qualities in this case. And he's bringing himself back around and kind of reminding himself not once but twice that he has to go back to reality. So that is your imagery selection, and hopefully you enjoyed.